So good morning and welcome to today's art class. Our subject today is this lovely little yellow flower. So if you've downloaded the video, then you should have received some notes that look like this as well. On your notes, you have a colour picture like this one, and then you have a black and white as well. For the first part of the class, we're going to refer to the black and white version, and we are going to do a little charcoal sketch. And so that's always the best way I find to start a class or to start a painting is to do it in charcoal and just have a little practice, study the tones and get familiar with the shapes and the drawing, and then we can move on and do the colour version. So I'm just going to flick my screen over so that you can then see what I'm doing on my paper. So just one moment while I do that. If you have any questions during the class, please don't hesitate to unmute yourself and ask, because if you've got a question, most likely everyone else does too. That's usually how it works. So what you're looking at now is my table, and I've got my iPad looking down on my table. And this is where I'll be working from today. So you should be able to see my art diary, and I'll just adjust the focus on that so that it's nice and clear and doesn't keep moving around too much. There we go, that's better. Lovely. So as I said before, we're doing this yellow flower today. I chose a yellow flower because I thought it's lovely and bright, and it's nice to do something that's got a bit of brightness and a bit of vibrancy about it. Flowers are often challenging. We think that they're going to be easy, but they're often a little bit more tricky than what you expect. So the first part of the class, as I mentioned, is a charcoal drawing. So what you'll need is your art diary or some drawing paper or cartridge, just regular old cartridge paper, and then some charcoal. So what I've got here is a little tin, and I've got skinny bits and fat bits in there. So I'm going to pick out a skinny piece and a little short chunky piece. The skinny piece I'll use to do my line work or my drawing with, and then the chunky bit will be to do some shading with. So that's why I like to have two sizes, I suppose. And this theory applies to pastels as well, and we'll talk about that as we move on. So the first thing we want to do is draw up a shape on your page, either the same size as this one that you've got here on your printout, or slightly smaller or larger, whatever works for you. Just make sure that you do it in a landscape format. So that means it's wider across the top and narrow on the sides. So I'm just going to draw up myself an area like this. As I said, you could make it smaller if you wanted to, but I quite like doing it nearly as big as the page because then I can get stuck into the detail. Now you'll see on the picture here that I've put a little grid mark on there. So what I've done is divided this picture up into 16 squares pretty much. So it's half and half and then half again. That actually just helps us get the drawing right. So I find that's a really great way to learn to draw something and to get all your proportions and shapes and everything in the right place. So what I'm going to do on this shape that I've just drawn here, I'll use a ruler. Sometimes I'll do this freehand depending on how exact I want to be. But for today, I'm going to just roughly draw in where all those marks are. If you want to measure that up and do your halfway lines, then by all means, go ahead and do that. So they're not quite square, each one of these little segments. But that gives me 16 squares now. And then I can refer back to the grid on the picture and fill in each part as we go. So we'll break it down into little squares as we do the drawing. And it really does help you to figure out where things sit within your drawing. Helps you get good at it. And it also gets the sizes and the perspective and everything right. So for the first part of this class, we'll be looking at the coloured version because that's got the grid on it. So when you look at it, you can see on the picture here, this top row, so right across the top of the picture, all the segments there don't have any flowers in them. There's actually nothing there, so we don't need to look at that area. We can leave that blank pretty much. We'll come down to the second row. You can see that the tops of the petals all sit within that second row area there. And they're very distinct shapes. So what I'm looking at is the shape of this petal in this segment here, and where it starts and where it ends in relation to that little cube, I'll call it, even though they're not square. And then across to the next one, and the shape of that and the outline around that, and how that fits inside this little segment. And then across, and the same thing on this one, and then on that one. And so if you actually cover up each section on this picture and just look at each little part, you can just draw in your line work for each area. And then when you uncover it, you'll have the whole thing done. So I find it is so much easier to break something down into smaller pieces, like a jigsaw puzzle pretty much. And then you put it all together. So the next row down, you'll see has most of the detail of the flowers. So again, we've got edges in there of the petals, but we've also got all these center areas with the little thingies there. Forgotten the name, it might come to me during class, might not. We've also got some shadow down on the right-hand side. And then in the bottom row across the base of the picture, we have just a little bit of petal and the stems of the flowers. There's also background in there, but we're not going to be worrying about background today. So you can see most of the detail of these flowers sits within the two middle rows and all the way across. So that breaking something up like that really just helps you get started. So let's start off in this little section here. So this is the second one down and off to the right, left side. So as I said earlier, if I cover up all the other areas, so imagine I can't see that. I'm just looking at this little cube or 16th here. And I can see where the petal begins on that side there and where it ends on this side here, and then the shape of it as it comes down. So I'm inside this little section here that I've drawn onto my paper, and I can say, well, the petal starts here and it kind of comes across through there, and then it comes off, actually it's a bit lower, comes off about there. So that's all I need to put in for that section there. Make sense? And then I can move across. So we'll go across in this row. I'll move across and we're going to look at this little segment here. Okay, so I can see that it starts where the other one ended and it comes up, and then we've got this little shape that comes up almost to that next grid line, and then down quite low there, and then back up and across to there. So that's pretty much the shape we want to get drawn in for that little bit there. So just look at your outside edges. Don't worry about all the shading and the color and everything else. We just want to draw in the outline first. That's just going to give us our basic outline of the picture, and then we'll come back and do shading and things afterwards. Okay, so then we move across to the next segment, and I can see that this petal continues down. So I've got like a V shape here, and it comes up, and then the top of that petal's sort of flattish, and then it dips down as it goes off onto that right-hand side there. So when I said a V shape, what I was looking at was the negative space. So negative space is the space around something. So if you're struggling to see the shape of the actual petal, look at the shape of the background around it and see just in here on the picture, there's a little V shape there. So finding little shapes like that really helps you to determine where things need to go. So by looking at that, I can see that I need to just adjust this little bit here because it dips down a bit more than what I drew, because I'm looking at the negative space. So that's the area around the petal, that brown section in the background. That's an actual shape there. So you've got to kind of flip your brain around sometimes and see things differently to help you find where everything sits. I'll just move this over to the other side now. And now I'm looking at this far right-hand corner where this little petal comes into this segment here. So again, I can look at where that begins, and it comes out and around and then down like that. So that's basically that top row, the outline of the petals across the top row is done. So it looks a bit weird at this point, but if you just go with that and follow the shapes all the way through, then you'll find it'll work out nicely. So let's go back over to the left side again, and we'll get into this second row down. And if I look at the edge of the petal there, it's almost like an S shape, isn't it? It comes down through there. Again, you can look at the negative space and see that. In too far. It comes down like that. Don't forget to use your kneadable eraser if you need to remove any of the charcoal. Okay, lovely. So that's that shape there. Then we'll move across into the next area in here. Now, I'm going to ignore all the detail for now. What I'm just looking at is this outline of the flowers. So I'm just looking at the yellow outline and then the dark background. So technically, we've just got this little V shape in there that we need to pop in. So it literally goes like that inside this segment. And if you feel like continuing down into this bottom row just to get those edges done, then by all means go down into there. There's no, pattern or right way or wrong way to do this. It's just whatever feels right for you. So you can join the lines here and have that lovely continuous flow through. So now we've almost got this left-hand flower drawn in, as oddly as that looks. Okay, now moving across into this section here, into this little area. So it literally just dips down there, and the bottom of that flower sits on this grid line. So I can use that to kind of sit my flower onto there. And then as we come across, we can go down into this one here below. So this grid line here, you can see that the bottom of the petal there, or the shape of the edge of it, dips down through there. So I've just got this lovely, just make that a bit wider, through there like that. So that's that little outline in the bottom row there. And then just move my picture across so I can see which one I'm looking at. While I'm down in this bottom right hand corner, so let's continue through there and draw in the shape of this petal across there. So I can just bring that in, and notice the edges are a bit kind of wiggly and wavy. So it's not a hard, sharp line. It's got little soft edges and it's all kind of zigzaggy. So we can do it like that. And it comes almost to the edge of the page, not quite. So we've got some background here in behind it. And then I come back up into this final square here. So this is our last little section here that we're going to draw the outline into. So continuing up, I can see this petal comes up about halfway inside here. So I'm going to do my little line all the way up through there. And then it kind of just sweeps across, doesn't it, to about there. So that's a lovely big petal that's sort of sitting down below all the other ones. And then I can bring that across again and join up my final petal. So now you should have a continuous outline of the shape of your flower. So that's how you've got to start with your drawing. You really need to get that part done first, and then you can start to get all the little details and the shading and things in. And it might look a little bit weird at first, but it's what you need to do to get everything in the right place. Okay, so while we're here, we may as well put these stems of the flowers in. If you look at the far right one, so we've got 3 stems, it looks like, but only 2 flowers. So I'm not sure where the other one got to. Who knows? Up to you whether you put in the 3rd one or not. Probably don't really need to. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But anyway, do what you'll see, as Leslie says. She says, if it's there, I'm going to put it in. Okay, cool. So if that's what's there, then you put it in, or you can have some artistic license and choose to leave things out. So just drawing in those stems in relation to your grid line, so you can see where they kind of cross over the grid line and where they sit within that. And there is that other little one there. I'll pop it in for now. I might change my mind later, but I'll just draw that in loosely for now. So they're our stems. And the next thing we need to look at now is the edges of the petals that kind of overlap each other. So rather than get into too much detail, once we've got the drawing in place like that, now it's time to look at the black and white version, because what we want to do is just focus on the shading and the tones. And that's what's actually going to bring this to life, because it's all about tones. The darks and the lights are what brings things forward or further away. They give things texture and body. And looking at a black and white version of your picture is always a great way to figure out where the tones are. So this is the time when I want to pick up my short little stumpy bit of charcoal, because what I want to do now is just really look at the shading on here. I'll just move this over a little bit so I can see it properly. And it's all sitting there easily. Cool. So a short stick of charcoal like that is really good, because I can just now use that to softly shade in different sections. So what I want to do now is just look at the black and white version, and we're going to put in the darkest sections that you can see. So by using it on its side, we get a lovely soft kind of mark, and it's not as hard and sharp as it would be if we were using the tip of the charcoal. So it's really just about looking at all the shading and all the darks and getting those variation of greys going on in there. You can see all those little honey thingies poking up, and they're really light. So they're quite white against the darkness of the petal. And that's what's going to give this the drama and make it interesting to look at. It's creating those little white areas up against the darks, because white against dark creates amazing drama. If you need to refer back to your picture, or if you can't see enough detail, then do that, of course, but try to keep it fairly loose at this point. You just want to get familiar with the tones. So as I'm moving my charcoal around, I'm just looking for the dark areas and referring to the black and white picture. So some of the dark areas are shadow. For instance, on this right-hand petal, this big petal that sits across the base there, there's a dark shadow sitting on that. So that's going to be shadow cast by the petal above it. So when you're looking at your shadows, then you can kind of figure out where the light's coming from, because that's really important to know the direction of the light, because then you can put your shadows in the right spot. And you can see on this picture that the light's actually coming from, I would say, above, because we've got all this beautiful shadow falling onto the petals from parts of the flower that are above it. So for instance, these little dark areas here on this big wide petal, they're shadows of the stamen. That's the word. I knew it had come to me. They're the shadows of the stamen that are poking up here. So we've got all this lovely stamen going on in here, and we've got this big black area just through there, which is the center of that. And then we've got all of those kind of poking out, and they're very light. So we want to try and make sure we keep them fairly white. What I'm doing is just shading that lightly, and then I can come back with my kneadable eraser afterwards and take out some of the charcoal to get the white back in, because the white will then show through on the paper, and that becomes more white. So there's very subtle shadows through here, just on the little crinkles of the petal where it's catching the light and forming shadow. So you can see how that is starting to develop now. We've got to kind of find the edges of the petals as we work our way around this. And so looking at your grid, and the edge of this petal. So we've got this petal here that sits up in front, and what that does is it's got a little fold in it, and it sits in the front there, and then we've got shadow on this side of it. And it's kind of a mid-tone, isn't it? It's not really light, but it's not really dark either. So when you look at the colour version, it's a little bit more orange. It's a darker yellow or an orangey colour. When you look at your black and white, it's just a lighter kind of grey with a few little wrinkles and dips and things running through it. So what distinguishes this little petal in the front here from what is behind it is the tone. So you can see it's a mid-tone, it's quite light, but then everything behind it, the stamens that are poking out behind it are white or light. So that's how this can be separated from those because of the tone. So we can pop the stamens back in once we've got all the darks in. So then looking at the edges of this petal here, you can see how they're two separate flowers and they kind of merge in the middle there. So we've got this lovely wiggly sort of effect going on between the two of the flowers where the petals kind of run into each other. There's a lot of detail and there's a lot of shadow and kind of scribbly bits through there. So I'm just going to do a few little marks to indicate that. And of course we can put more detail in there later on. And just moving over then into this next flower. So again, looking at, for instance, this little petal here on the left-hand flower. Just going to look at my picture again so I can find my grid lines. And the edge of that petal comes down through there like that. And then over on the other side, we've got the edge of the petal kind of wafting around through there. And again, it's like a petticoat, isn't it? It's like all these beautiful little layers and edges popping around through there. So, and we've also got the middle dark stamen thingy in that one. And then we've got beautiful shadow coming out of that one too. So just again, checking back on your black and white picture to notice the shadows and the shading through these little petals. So this little exercise is really just a way of becoming familiar with the picture, working out where everything sits and noticing, the direction of light and all the little shadows and bits and bobs and the wrinkles and creases and shapes. So as I said earlier, flowers are not easy. You look at them and think, oh yeah, that's easy. But when you get into the detail, it's very interesting because they're just quite complex, really. And it's amazing, really, that, all these little flowers have so much detail and layers in them. So you might end up with homework today, depending on how we go for time. So that's pretty much my shading done. As I said earlier, I'm not going to bother with the background today. When we do the colour version, I'm going to work on a darker paper because I really like the idea of having the bright flowers on a dark background. If you want to, you can do your background and fill it all in as you see it here. And by all means do that, it'd be beautiful. Or you may have done it already prior to class. I think I said in the notes, if you wanted to do that, to make sure you do it before class so that you've got it ready to go. Otherwise, we're just going to leave the background undone today and work on the flowers. So a dark coloured paper would work really well because we've got all these beautiful beautiful yellows and brights to pop on. And I love working on dark paper. But that's just me. Okay, so I'm just lightly marking in the shape and the directions of these little stamens. And you can see there's all those little tiny yellow ends on those. So to kind of represent those, I'm just doing some little dots with my charcoal. I'm using the tip of it now just to get smaller marks on there. And if you wanted to then take out some of the dark or the grey, then you could come back in with your kneadable eraser and mark in some of the light areas just to get a little bit of light back in. And just noticing all the edges of your petals. So I'll just show you quickly with the kneadable eraser, and then we're going to move on and get stuck into the colour. If you wanted to start to push some of this around with your fingers, you can do that too. Pushing the charcoal around with fingers will kind of soften it a little bit and make it not quite so dark, but then you can come back in and darken up a couple of areas just to get a bit more depth and drama in there. But to get light back in when you're doing charcoal, you can either use charcoal pencils, which probably works better on different paper, but this is a white charcoal pencil, and they're wonderful, especially when you're working on a darker paper and you want to get the white back into it. It's really lovely for putting all your whites back in. The other option is to use your kneadable eraser and just shape it into like a knife edge or a tip or whatever works for you, and kind of draw with it really, just to take charcoal off and get some of that white back in. So you can see that's working over that darker area there. It's easier to see when it's got more charcoal on the page. And over here on this side, and you can use it to put some of your little stamen dots in there too. You'll have to keep re-kneading the eraser though, because they're called kneadable erasers because you can shape them all the time and keep kind of kneading them. So what happens is with these erasers, rather than a normal eraser will take paper off the page, and that's how you remove your mark. But with a kneadable eraser, it actually picks the pigment up off the page and it doesn't damage your paper. So it leaves your paper nice, and you don't get, big eraser marks in it, but it just picks up the pigment. It feels like blue tack. It's kind of tacky, and you can shape it into all kinds of different shapes, and you can sort of draw with it as well in your charcoal. So it's quite lovely. It's also good for blending. So I can blend my charcoal in with this. So I find lots and lots of different uses for my kneadable eraser. They start off a light grey colour. You can see this one's well used because it's pretty dirty. But I do kind of make them last for ages, and you can get quite a long time out of them. So yeah, they're great. Really good for getting your lights back in. So that's just a very quick little study in shading. And as I said, if you wanted to come back in and darken up in a couple of spots where it's really dark and create that drama, you can do that. And just push a little bit harder with your charcoal on your paper and get that black back in there. And then if you wanted to soften it off and it's too dark, you can pop your fingers in and give it a little rub, or use your eraser and take some out. So that's just a quick little study of how to draw that up in charcoal, and just have a rehearsal. It's always nice to have a rehearsal and practice before you do the real thing, I think. It just means that you are more familiar with your picture and you've got a bit of an idea of how you're going to tackle it. And then you could shade your background if you wanted to with your charcoal to darken it off. Again, a darker background is going to make the flowers or the white or the lights pop more. And again, come back in with your eraser just to get your white back in. So I can come through here and lighten that up nice and bright like that. So it's amazing what you can do just with a bit of charcoal. It's quite fun really to see what happens. So as I said, there's lots of crinkles and lines and valleys and dips and things in these flowers, and it's really just a study of the tone and the shading and figuring out what they are, and then converting that tone to color. So when we choose colors to do this, if you've got a few different tones in yellow, that'll be really helpful, because you're going to need like a darker orangey kind of color, and then a really bright light yellow, and then perhaps a bit of red to get into those more warm areas. There's like a limey green kind of colour through there as well, and yeah, and a couple of oranges. And then in the shadows are always lovely in purples or a blue. So remember also that yellow and purple are complementary colours, so that when they sit together on the colour wheel, you'll find that your yellow and your purple sit opposite. So your opposite colours are your complementaries. And I'm going to choose kind of a purple coloured paper today to do this on, because I know that yellow will just sing on top of the purple. So knowing those things really helps to choose, what background colours you want, and what paper colour you want, and even what colour to use in your painting. So as I said, purple will be lovely for your shadows, and it'll just give it some lovely depth. I do like using purple for shadows. I just think it looks yum yum. So that's a very quick sketch of the flowers in charcoal. You could continue on with that and really refine it and make it look amazing if you wanted to. But I don't want to spend too much time on that now, because we want to get stuck into this colour version. So I'll pop that away now. And next thing we're going to do is grab your paper that you've picked out for today. So, or if you haven't picked it out, have a look through your collection and see what you've got. Black would be beautiful. So, or a dark aubergine, that lovely purpley aubergine colour. This one, I think it's called maroon or burgundy or something like that. Can't quite remember, but it's got a bit of a reddy purple tinge to it. And I think that might be quite lovely with my yellow. If you're not sure and you want to test your colours, you can always, get a scrap of paper or another piece and just get some pastels and push them around together and see what works. Because often, you might think something's going to look great on a particular paper or with different colours, and sometimes it doesn't. So it's always nice if you can test that first. So I'm going to just wander over to my pastels now and choose out some colours. So when I do that, I'm going to take this with me, take my reference photo with me, grab a little box, and then pick out the pastels that I want to use. So I kind of hover this over my pastels or my collection to try and match the colours. So feel free to do the same. I'll keep talking as I go and looking for some really nice oranges and yellows. So what you want is a very light yellow, if you have one, very like a lemon yellow, something fairly light. That's going to work for those little white areas in the middle there underneath the stamen. So I've got a nice pale yellow there. And then something with a little bit more red in it, a little bit warmer. So yellow is a tricky one. We often don't have a nice range of yellows. And it's not a colour we use a lot. So you may not have a very big selection. And if you don't, that's cool, because then you can choose some reds or oranges and kind of merge them together a little bit. So red would be lovely for some of the darker or deeper coloured areas. So I've got a red, and consider too also your tones. So make sure that you get, I'm going to get a more bluey kind of red, so it's a little bit darker. So you want a really pale yellow for your light. You also want white, just to put a few highlights on at the end. So I'll grab a little white one. So white, very light yellow, and then you want 2 or 3 other yellows if you have them in your set. And try to get a nice range from light to darker if you can. So more of a like an orangey sort of yellow, and then a golden yellow if you have them. And then if you have any orange, then that would be helpful too. I'm lucky because I've had years and years to collect quite a few pastels, so I've got a nice range to choose from. But I do always complain that I don't have enough, of course, because you never do. I'm just looking at my oranges, and I've got some really beautiful reddy orange colours too. So I'm going to grab one of those. So I've got a few, I'll pop them here on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. So I've got a white and a very pale yellow, and I've got 3 yellows there. One's a golden yellow, and then there's one that's a little bit more orange, and then I've got this orange colour. So that kind of goes with the oranges. And then I've got red. So a darker red. In the middle of the stamens there, to me that looks kind of like a green. It's a sort of a dark green. I'm just zooming in on it. I've got it on my iPad, so I can get in nice and close and have a look at that colour. It's a dark green colour, so I'm going to grab a dark green for that. I can find one that might work. A little bit of dark green. Try and keep it all in order. Try to keep it from light to dark, so I've got a nice range of tones there. And then we've got, I'm going to call it purple in the shadows. You might decide it's not purple, it might be more blue for you. It's a funny colour. It's quite tricky to distinguish. It's nearly like a browny purple colour in the shadows on the petals is what I'm talking about, in those darker areas. It's like a brown purple. I think blue violet might be helpful in some spots, but probably not a lot. Or red violet might be an option. Okay, so that's red violet, which looks nearly black. It's quite dark, but it's got a red kind of undertone to it. I'm also going to grab a purple and pop that in too, just for fun. So they're my base colours. Now, you know you can always go back and get more if you feel like you don't have enough to start with. But what I like to do at the beginning is just make sure I've got a nice little palette set aside. And if you pop it in a little box or a container like this to keep it separate from your main collection, then you know, you kind of know what colours you're using, and you also can come back next week and continue on if you get interrupted or you don't get finished. So it's nice to keep your palette separate from everything else while you're working on a painting. Because you know, in the past I've put them all away and then come back and gone, oh, which brown did I use, and so on and so forth. So it can get a little bit tricky sometimes. I think I said there was a limey green in there before, didn't I? Might wait and see. Although on the stems, it's, yeah, there probably is a bit more lighter green. So I'll just grab another one. Just get this one. It might be a bit light, but I'll see how we go. And those little stems have fur on them. If you look nice and closely, you can see there's little spiky bits of fur on them. Okay, so once we've got our colours picked out, then you want to start to grid up your page again. And if you're on a dark paper like this, then you'd be wanting to use a light pastel or charcoal pencil. So I prefer to use charcoal wherever I can to do this kind of thing, because I know it comes off a little bit easier than a pastel pencil. So even if you can see black charcoal on your dark paper, then use that. I just find it's much nicer to come off. Sometimes your pastel pencil, if we press a bit firmer, will kind of stick to the paper and it'll leave marks. And in that case, if that happens, then you might want to fill in the background later on. Okay, so I've got all my colours there. I'll move them over the other side because I always work from the left because I'm left-handed. So I'll do mine in white just so you can see it clearly, but if you can see charcoal, like black charcoal on your page, then by all means do that. So the page is 30 across, so your halfway is 15, and then your quarter of a way is 7.5 and 22.5. So your width is 30, halfway is 15, and then you want to mark in 7.5 and 22.5. The other cool thing I like to do and often forget to do is just put those marks on the border. If you've got this paper and you've got a little border around the edge, just pop them on there so you can find them later. Because if you fill in, if you fill in your flower and you can't find the edges and you can't work out where it's supposed to go, often referring back to these little grid marks will help you with your structure. So now I'm just going to join those lines up very lightly. I'm not going to press very hard because what I want to do is rub this mark off afterwards so I can keep the background nice and clean. I'm just going to go very lightly. So I'll rule downwards. Now I'm going to go across. So this is 23 wide. So 11.5 is my halfway, and 5 3/4 is the other way. 11.5, 5 3/4, and then I always cheat and just move the ruler up so I can find 5 3/4 again instead of trying to figure out what that is. And then ruling this across. So this is very close to an A4 size. It's slightly larger. So now I've got my grid in there. And as I said, just press lightly. You don't want to make that too firm. And the other thing we need is a little board. So I've just got to grab my drawing board and then we can tape the paper down onto that. And what that does is it keeps it nice and still. Just get last week's painting off here. What I do on the board is when I tape it down, I just tape it on the corners usually. And if I'm working flat on a table like I am today, then that's fine. It just kind of holds my paper in place. Oh, there's a doggy under my desk. Okay, and then I've just got old tape from last week. So I'm just going to reuse that because it's often better if you've got tape that's been used before because then you tend not to tear the paper. If you're putting fresh tape down, just stick it onto your tablecloth or your clothes or something first, just to get a bit of the adhesive off because often it can rip your paper when you take it off afterwards, especially if you leave it on for a week or so. So as I said, I've just got a bit of old tape on the corners there and it's just holding the paper in place now. So that's not going to move around and I can work freely and still have two hands to do it with rather than trying to hold your paper still all the time. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is draw this up like we did before, just do the outline in the grids. So we'll start where we started last time. I'm just going to refer back to my grid and look at the shape of this petal as it comes around. And I'm just using my pencil very lightly. What I want to do is just keep my mark quite loose and light so that it doesn't stain my paper. This paper is wonderful for pastels, but it kind of hangs on to everything very well. And if you want to get it off, it can be a bit of a challenge sometimes. So as I'm doing this, I'm holding my pencil quite loose in my hand. You can see I've got it quite loose. So it kind of has a fair bit of freedom and it's not too firm on the paper. If you hold your pencil as if you're writing, then you've got a much more restricted movement with it. And I find I can't draw quite so easily as I can if I just hold it loose like this. Then as you get into more detail, you can kind of hold it differently and refine your mark. But for the beginning, when I'm first just doing my very loose outline, I just keep it quite loose and soft. And that way it's just sort of running over the paper without me pushing it in, if that makes sense. So coming across here, and then I know I'm going a bit quickly, but if you've done this already in charcoal, then it's slightly easier next time round. And as we do that, you can start to notice the edges of the petals that lay up over each other as well. So you can see up here, I brought my line down to here. So I can see that this little petal sits independently of the others. And it kind of comes down. It's a bit messy in the middle there. I can't see where it begins and where it ends very clearly. I'm just going to guesstimate that. And so this is the way I always draw up my paintings or my artwork, just to get those basic shapes in place first. Okie dokie. Remembering where they sit in the grid. So just always referring back to the grid and where everything kind of intersects, and measure it by eye, or if you have to use a ruler, you can do it that way too. But just seeing, the height and the distance between each element, basically, because every part of this is just a little shape. Everything is its own shape, and you just need to kind of find the shapes and draw them in within that grid. So over here on the left-hand flower, we've got this petal that, even though I'm zooming in on it, it's tricky to see where they start and end. So the secret to that is making sure we get the tones in the right place. So even if you can't see the edge of the petal or define where that is, if you put a little bit of light yellow there and a little bit of dark yellow there and light and dark and so forth, exactly as you see in the picture, then that's just going to work. You don't need to know all that stuff. All you need to know is what tone or colour needs to sit where, and that will bring it all together for you. Okay. And then we've got our little stamen. So notice where that sits inside your grid area. So this one on the left sits in this little grid section here, and it's got this cute little cross thing on the top of it. So now we're kind of noticing more detail, a little bit more information. Now you don't need to put all of this information in at this point, because what will happen is we'll just lose most of it anyway, because we're going to block all this in with pastel, and so all the finer lines and things you're going to lose, because they'll kind of get lost underneath all the pastel. So don't spend a whole bunch of time doing every tiny little detail. That will come at the end when we start to put it in, once we've got all this colour blocked in. So just noticing where the middle of the flower on the right sits inside that grid. So I've got that little dark area there, and then all the little stamens that pop out. So I'm just putting them in loosely for now, because I know that I won't see them at all shortly. So I just want to get that basic drawing in. Noticing where the stems sit. And I'm bamboozled as to why there are 3 stems, but anyway, if that's what's there, that's what's there. When you look at the picture, it doesn't feel weird that there are 3 stems. It's only when I'm looking at it thinking, why are there 2 flowers? Anyway, maybe there's a bud or something. Or maybe that mess in the middle is something else, another flower. No, it's not. I actually don't know. Anyway, it's okay. So that's your basic outline or drawing of the flower. And then the next part is to start blocking in with some colour. First off though, we're going to have a little break. So what I'm going to do is just take a little 10-minute break and come back shortly. So we've got our colours ready to go. We've got the drawing done. And now we're going to start to block in. So when I block in, I like to work from dark up to light. It just means that if you get your darks down first and notice where your shadows and things are, the colours you put over the top kind of blend in and you start to build up some really beautiful muddy colours or tones. So like we did with the charcoal, if you have a look at your black and white version, or even your colour, if you can see the darks in there easily, and just grab maybe your darkest pastel. So for me, that's my red violet colour. And I've got a little short stumpy piece there. So you might have longer pastels than these because they come in all shapes and sizes. I'll just talk about that for a sec. So this one here you can see is more square. This yellow, what was yellow, it's quite dirty. That's the other problem. They get very dirty when they roll around together. So that is an Art Spectrum Extra Soft pastel. So you can see it's a square shape. Now they're lovely because you can use the sides or the edges or the ends to get all kinds of shapes and marks with those. This one is probably an Art Spectrum Round or some other brand, but they come in a round stick, and that's the new ones are usually a little bit longer than that. So when I get those, I like to break them because they're too long to do shading and things with the way I work. What else have I got here? This is a little square one again. So that's a Blue Earth brand. They're beautiful, really creamy and soft. And all my other ones are just broken bits of mostly round Art Spectrum ones. You can see the well-used ones are the tiny scrappy ones that I still keep using because I love them the best. So they come in all shapes and sizes, but I do find a smaller piece like this on a smaller bit of paper like we're working on today is good because I can literally just put it down flat like that and rub it around where I can see shadow or dark. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm just referring back to the black and white picture mostly just to find the dark areas, because what I want to do is just rub some pastel on there, just on it, using the pastel stick on its side. I'll just get that out of the way because it's annoying me, and literally wiping it over the paper. And what that does is it just puts a thin layer of pastel down, and I don't want to put too much down because what I like to do is kind of build up my layers and then start to kind of blend them all together. So I like to start off light and wide. This might be a good little quote I can make up afterwards. Light and wide to begin, and then as we get more into the detail, then we get tighter and smaller in marks, because that's when you start noticing all the little lines and the dots and bits and bobs. But for now, we want to just mark in where all the dark is. So I'm just kind of running around the whole thing with my eyes and noticing the darker areas where there's shadow or a darker yellow colour. Not necessarily black or purple or anything like that, even though I'm using a red violet. So this is a purpley kind of dark colour that I'm using to create my dark mark. And then, of course, we've got our stamens in the middle because they're quite dark. Now, if you find that whatever you've picked up isn't dark enough, you might want to use black later on. What I like to do is sort of start off not quite black yet, and then if I need to add more dark, I can. I like to leave myself some space to go darker or lighter. So I tend to sort of work in the mid-tones or the tones that are not quite so dramatic, so that I can then add in the drama at the end, or if I need it as I go. So I've kind of blocked in all those darker areas that I can see on the picture. And I've just done it very loosely. So just do it loose and light to start with. You'll find these dark colours are very strong, so you don't want too much of it on your paper because it can kind of stain everything else. We want to leave some room or some pure paper. So for instance, here on this petal here, you can see in the picture it's quite bright and light. So just in there, it's very yellow, very light, and I want to try to leave that paper without any other colour on it, so that when I put my yellow down, it'll be quite pure and bright. If I have the dark or another colour near it or under it, you can contaminate it and, you know, kind of make it go muddy. So you've got to sort of think about that stuff as well. However, pastels are very forgiving, and you can get quite a lot of mileage out of a piece of paper. So, you know, if you do muck it up and put the wrong colour down, it's reasonably easy to either cover it with another colour or take it off with your kneadable eraser, as long as you press light to begin with. Okay, so we've got some darks on there. Next thing I want to do is put down some of my mids. So I'm just looking at my flowers to determine my yellows. So by mids, I mean that mid-grey colour. If you look at your black and white version, you can see that. So you can see that it's kind of got 3 tones pretty much. You've got dark, light and mid, if we break it down and try to simplify it like that. So my mid-yellow, I need to choose what that will be out of my little palette that I've got here. So I think I might go with this really beautiful bright one. So it's quite a big chunky stick, but because it's got an end on it, I can actually use, you know, that end or the side or whatever to make my marks smaller. So I'm just going to use the tip of it and kind of move it around a little bit to create different areas. So what I'm going to do now is just literally fill in pretty much the rest of my petals with this yellow. Again, I'm just going to go light. I don't want to put too much down just yet, but you do need something to start with. Okay, so I'm just marking this in, keeping it loose and light, because we can get a few more layers on here. This is just the beginning. And once we've got this on, then we can start to kind of push it all in a little bit. Now, if you're more experienced, you might prefer not to blend it all in with your fingers. If you're like me and love blending, then you might like to stick your fingers in here. So see how that's already starting to have a little bit of a glow. And of course, I haven't put the lightest on yet. I'm going to save that for later. I like to save my lights for later, because that's when I get the most joy out of putting them on. You can see it kind of working really nicely. So just patching on some yellow where we haven't filled in with dark yet. We can always put light in afterwards. So if you've ever done watercolour before, you'll know that the light needs to be left undone if you want to use the paper for your light colours. Whereas with pastel, it's the other way around. You can put your lights on last. But as I said, it's better if you don't contaminate it too much underneath. So just patching in some yellow around there. This is a beautiful bright yellow, such a nice colour. Art Spectrum Extra Soft, these little square ones are lovely to use. They do work really well with this paper. However, everyone's going to have different pastels and brands and things. So if it's not, you know, looking the same, don't stress. Some pastels are harder than others. So if you've got things like Faber-Castell pastels, you'll find that they're quite hard, and you might have to press a little bit harder to get the colour to stick to the paper. But they're also awesome if you want to do finer lines. Whereas these softer pastels, it's harder to get a fine line in there. Okay. What I'm doing now is I'm just using the edge. So I'm just noticing, see all the edges? There's a few little edges there that have light on them, really bright little light, lit up, it's a silly word, edges that are catching the sun. And because they're kind of all wrinkled, we're getting different shapes. So I'm kind of just brightening up the shapes with the edge of my pastel now, and just looking at where the edge of those are and how they're catching the light on the little wrinkly bits that might be kind of poking out a bit more than the pieces in front of them. So as I said, just still keep it quite loose though. Don't worry about, you know, getting all the detail in there, because we are going to push this in with our fingers, and then it'll all sort of go a bit muddy, and then we can add colour back over the top again. So we're doing this process a few times. It's not just the once. And that's what's so nice about pastels, is you can kind of keep layering them on top of each other and building up the layers, and it gets beautiful results, because then you can kind of see the colours underneath, depending on how hard you press, how much pastel you put down. There's lots of different things to consider. All right, so now we're going to just find a finger, any finger, and start to push this in. What we want to do is start in the dark areas first. So if you get your finger and just kind of rub in those dark areas first, and then kind of push it out in towards the yellow section. So what will happen is it's going to stick the pigment to the paper. And if you don't have too much pastel down, you'll still be able to see the colour of the paper underneath. That's okay. Don't worry if it's looking a bit patchy and a bit weird, because we're going to come back over it. Okay, so this is just the foundation layer. We're going to add more on top. And you'll find as you do this, if you've got a dark with your yellow like I've got, it'll start to go kind of muddy, and it'll dull down the colour. It won't be as bright as the yellow won't be as bright, but that's okay. So I'm using one finger to do this, and what I'm doing as I'm moving my way around with my finger, I'm looking at the flow, I guess, of each petal. So the direction that the petal's kind of moving in or flowing in, and trying to move my finger in that direction. So all of these petals are kind of springing out from the middle of the flower, aren't they? They're kind of popping out from there. So what you want to be doing is kind of pulling the pastel in that direction from the center and out, so that it starts to naturally form this really beautiful shading or shape. So always coming from the middle out to the edge, or vice versa. But just trying to pull the pigment around in that direction to get that beautiful flow of the petal. And see how it's all turning a bit muddy? It's all getting a bit kind of dull and dirty looking. That's okay. It's actually really good, because it's a nice foundation that we can then build on. The other thing to think about while you're doing this is where each petal sits in relation to the others. So we want to be, when we get into the detail in a minute, we want to be working from the backmost petals or parts of the flower to the foremost ones. So if you look at this little flower here on the right, this little petal that sits in the front there is actually on top of everything else. It's in the foreground because it's overlapping and it's closest to us. So this one here is the front petal, whereas this one here on the right, this big one that sweeps out, is underneath that one. So we need to get in there and get that part done first when we come back to it, not just yet. So just when you're planning your painting, you've got to kind of think about where everything sits in relation to each other, so that you can then figure out which bit to do first, second, third, etc. And it's always, I find it much easier to work from either back to front or top to bottom, depending on what you're doing. But just, you know, layering each section or segment of your painting, and then doing the kind of working from back to front. Yeah. Because if I do the front petal first, then I've got to get in around it, which is often a little tricky with your pastels, because they're so chunky sometimes, and they're harder to do fine work with. So I find it much easier to do all the back things first and then work forward. Some people don't. So I've seen lots of pastel artists, they just kind of start on the top left corner of their picture and go across, or whatever works for them. So there's no right and wrong formula, But for me, I just think that makes sense, really. It's just logical to do it that way. So I've pushed all that pastel in now, and you can see it kind of looks a little bit grainy, and that's because the pastel is pigment, so it's literally just dust, coloured dust that we're pushing into the paper, and also because the paper has texture, so it feels like sandpaper, so it's quite gritty. So we're getting all these funny little dots, which is fine because this is just the first layer. We can actually get quite a few layers on here before it'll be too full. But squinting at that now, if I squint at my painting, I can see, you know, that I've got my shadows in around about the right place. The easiest thing to do if you're looking for your tones is to squint. So look through your eyelashes. Look at your picture, then look back at your reference photo or your black and white one, and just notice, have I got all the darks where they need to be? Is there enough dark in there? Can I darken that off a bit more? Or do I need to push it around or put a bit more down somewhere else? That kind of thing. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm just squinting at this and figuring out what I need to do. So what am going to do is put a bit more dark down. I feel like I need something darker, to be honest. But that's me, because I do enjoy creating a drama in my art. Not in my life, just in my art. More manageable that way. And just noticing where my darks are and if I need to add any more dark. Because what I'm thinking is, if I get all the darks in now, then I can start building up the lights. And I want the light to pop. And in order to make lights pop, you need to have darks, or darkest darks. So, you know, sometimes you might keep adding white or something to get something lighter. But if you think about it, add something darker next to it and it'll make the light pop. And don't be afraid of the dark. A lot of us are afraid to put too much dark down in case it, you know, we're kind of scared of the dark a little bit. But don't be. As long as you go gently and don't, you know, bang too much down in one go and you've got control over it, you'll be fine. But don't be afraid to use your darks. Otherwise, everything's a little bit mid-tone and boring. Lovely, lovely. So I've got all my darks marked in just about where I want them, adding a little bit more just to make it a little stronger. And pushing it in with my finger. So this is a blending process. A lot of pastel artists don't like to blend, but I love it. So, you know, we all find our own style, I guess. Now, things like shadows, for instance, this little hard shadow here, I can actually come back afterwards and sharpen that up a bit more, even if we have to use pencils to get the really pointy bits done. I'm just noticing the little dark areas where the petals might be folding up around the edges, basically, and you know it's not catching the light. Remember, we haven't put the light in yet, so we're still kind of working with the darks and the mids. And if you do get too much pastel in one spot and you want to take it off, again, you can use your kneadable eraser, so you can actually just put that on there. Sometimes it's better to just dab it and pick up the pigment like this, and then find the clean edge and keep dabbing. If you imagine little bits of dust, and this is just kind of sticking to the dust and picking it all up. Or you can rub it. Sometimes rubbing will blend it in more, so kind of dab first and then see how you go. And as I said earlier, you'll want to be rubbing out your grid line too as you go. If you want to keep your background clean and clear, then the grid line will have to come off too. So you could do that now or later, whatever you want to do. I'm just testing to make sure that it's going to come off nice and easy. If it doesn't, and you're feeling annoyed about that, you may possibly want to fill in the background. So you could actually put pastel in the background and fill it all in with these beautiful greens and different things, and have play with that. Backgrounds are fun to do. Lots of blending to do there, but you could have a bit of fun with that. There is a little bud just there too on the far left bottom corner, but I'm not going to bother with that one today. But if you did the background, you could potentially put that in. So my charcoal pencil's coming off quite easily. So at this point, I'm going to be leaving my paper unpainted, or the background unpainted. Knowing me, I'll probably change my mind and put it in later. But as I said earlier, if you put it in earlier, it's always going to be easier to, work on top of it. So if you plan to put a background in, you're better off doing it at the beginning, and then put your flower on top so that you haven't got any gaps or issues trying to, get that background nice and blended behind your flower. Okay, so let's get stuck into a bit of purple, I think. So I want to put a little bit of this purple in. I know it's not the darkest, but it's going to contribute to creating some of this lovely shadow. So I'm just going to spot a bit of purple on here and there. Now the reason I'm using purple, I think I mentioned earlier, is because it's complementary to yellow. So purple and yellow always look beautiful together. And it's just such a nice way to create some shadow and tone. Go through there. And I think I said earlier, these shadows do look kind of purple to me. You might prefer to use blue. I didn't put blue in my palette, but blue would probably be quite lovely too. Once I've got a few bits of purple on there, I'm just going to push that in lightly. So what I'm doing is trying to create a bit of a range of tone within the darks. We've put the darkest one down. That was the red violet that I used before. And now I'm putting a bit of purple on there just to kind of get a nice range of tones. Because you can see in the black and white version, it's not just black and white. There's lots of different grey tones in there. And by pressing not quite so hard this time, some of the purple's sitting on the surface. So it's got this lovely kind of transparency to it. There we go. And just checking, the little wrinkles around the edges of your flowers. So now we're starting to notice a little bit more detail. So as we build the layers up, we kind of start to see more detail and where there's more shadow and wrinkles and creases and things like that. I'm putting the dark areas in first because I just find that's a bit easier. And then we can come back in with some lights and mids after. Got a snoring doggy under my table. She's just done the worst fart ever. Trying not to breathe. Okay. There's also some shadow, even though those little stamen thingies on the picture are quite bright. On that left one in particular, there's quite a lot of purple or shadow under those. So we need to get some of that in there now. And then we can get the bright stamens and little dots and things in there afterwards. So we're kind of, when you're doing this, you've got to think about what's behind and what's in front and work from back to front, if that makes sense. So I know I can come back over that and put all those little lines and dots and things in, and that'll bring it to life, but we've still got to get the dark behind it first. Okay, so I'm just kind of running around this with my purple, looking at all the little edges and things. So you can see there's all those little wrinkly edges of the petals. Some dip up and some dip down. where they dip down, they're a little bit darker, and where they dip up, they're lighter because the edges of them are catching the light. It's like a little petticoat with ruffles. So you can see on this left-hand side where I put some of that brighter yellow before, just to pick up a little bit of the highlight on the edges. That's the sort of thing we're going to be starting to do in a moment to get some of the detail going on in there. Okay, so now I'm going to pick up I've got 3 yellows. Remember, I picked up 3 yellows before. So I've got this a golden yellow, and then a very lemon yellow, and then a more orange yellow. So I want to have a range of yellows because I can see lots of different golden colours in there. Now, as I said, if you don't have any, nice range of yellows, you might want to pick up an orange or something like that, just to try and create this wrinkly sort of effect. They almost look like, some of the petals look like they've been crushed and then folded out again because they've got all these little dips and dents in them. So I'm going to pick up the yellow I had originally. That's my golden yellow, and just start to put a bit more of that on. Now, this is not the lightest yellow that I'm going to use. So I'm just going to patch this around where I can see a golden kind of yellow colour, or orange if you don't have yellows. Again, it's all just shapes. So if you look at the different shapes of the different colours, for instance, this section here is like a little triangle. It's a little light triangular shape there. And then in behind it, there's, the darker section. So I want to leave that dark at the moment. And then we've got all these little wiggly edges of petals that we want to put into. So when I do the wiggly edges like that, I'm using the edge of my pastel, trying to just use the sharp edge, which is nice because with this shape pastel, I get a few options. So you can actually draw quite nice lines when you have a sharp edge on your pastel. It might be at the tip or the side, but you can really vary that quite nicely. So now what I'm doing is just looking at the shapes of the colours. So on this left-hand petal, it's kind of got all these little, like almost lines that come out from the middle, and a few little creases and bumps and things. I'm going to pick up my more orange pastel in a moment and add some of that in as well. So what I want to do is start to build up my range of yellows. But just noticing shapes at this point and colour. So it doesn't look like anything much at the moment. But now I'm just going to work on this flower for a minute because it's sort of a testing area as well to try and see what colours are going to work where. This is more orangey kind of yellow, so now I'm putting a bit more gold in there. Just trying to get a nice range of yellows happening. And in this foreground here, I really like this colour actually, it's lovely. I've got this beautiful orangey glow going on. I'm still keeping my marks fairly loose. So what I'm trying to do is just not get too caught up in the detail just yet. We're still working on getting colour down on the page. And then if I pick up my lightest yellow, so this is my lemony kind of yellow, I'm just going to pop that on to see how that looks to make my edges glow. So that's really lovely. I may not even use white at the end. I really like this pale yellow. I think it's really lovely to get some highlights going on in there. I don't want to overdo it either. But around those edges, it's really nice just to catch the light. Once we've got enough on there, we can push all of this in as well. So as I said, we're building up some layers. I should put that down and not touch it because I'm putting too much on there. You'll find different brands will behave differently also. So I've got my Art Spectrum, and then I've got, I think that orangey colour is something else. It's very creamy. So I'm going to just push this in now lightly. So when you do start to blend again, because we've already got one layer down, you don't want to press too hard. You just want to go lightly and kind of gently push these colours together because we want them to sort of merge and look like they're folding out from the middle. So I'm just holding my finger quite lightly on the paper. You'll find the harder you press, the more muddy it'll get, especially if you're on a dark paper, it'll get quite muddy. And if you do want a bit of mud, for instance, up in here, I want that to get a bit darker, I can push harder. See how it goes, kind of this lovely mud colour. Mud's not always a bad thing. It's quite nice. So where you want it to be a little darker, if you don't want to add more dark, you've got enough there, you can just push that in with your fingers and create all these different tones. So that's starting to form some really nice shadow. All right. So I'm just checking the middle now where the stamens are going to go, and I want to put that little dark blob back in there. So I'm thinking now I've got enough colour on the paper, on this flower. I'm going to do the other one after. So let's just do one flower at a time at this point. I've got enough pigment down on there. So now we're going to start to work on some detail. And now it's just about looking at the flower and noticing where things are. So this area here is kind of the backmost petal, I think, behind everything. And it's a little darker as it comes out from the middle. And then we've got a petal at the top there, so that kind of sits in front of this back one. So we need to sharpen up this edge here and get that to come forward a little bit more. And then we've got a little fold of that petal there, so that can be lighter as well. And as it comes around through here, it's a warmer colour, and it sort of comes, I'll just draw it, comes down through there-ish, a bit like that. So if you want to put a few marks in like that now, just to define each petal. And then we'll get into the center area and start to work on that, because it's the backmost, or it's underneath everything else. And so we want to get that working now, and then we can build around it pretty much. So just by doing a few fine lines like that, I'm starting to define my petals and figure out where they sit now. So I can see I've got this one here. All of this in the front here is a bit kind of messy. I'm not sure what's going on in there, but it's all, lacy and lovely. So we can do a few little different lines and things like that in there, because there's little bits that are catching the light, and then there's the darker bits. So we can use the lighter yellow to get some highlights happening in there. So as you work forward and build up your layers, if you kind of don't blend so much, so you're starting to sort of just let the pastel sit on the surface. And what I'm doing now is just patching in a little bit more of this lovely orangey colour. You might have a different colour, but whatever you've got, just patching that in to get that to sit on the surface. And see how, because I've already got that lovely dark underneath, it's starting to create a bit of texture now. And so we want to build that up and get that nice and thick and rich. And then we'll go into that center area and get that done. So as I said, less blending. Now we've got the base down. You don't need to be blending as much, because if you do keep sticking your fingers in there, you're going to start making mud. Whereas when you just let the colour sit on the top like this, it pops much nicer and it's more vibrant because we're not making mud out of it. It's really starting to glow nicely now. Okay, so let's do, hang on, before we do that middle bit, we need to kind of get into the petals behind the stamens so that we don't have to do them again afterwards. So let's just put a bit of your yellow back in there. Because we've got to put all those little dotty things and lines and stuff in. I'm just playing between my yellows now just to get some of the lights and darks going on. So see how you kind of, a lot of this is instinct. You just kind of have your pastels sitting there and you pick up different ones and add on different colours and just have a bit of a play with it. This is why we get the darks down first, because now we can build on that and get the brights to sit on the top. I'm liking the orange tones nicer, better than the yellow now. Sometimes yellow looks a little bit too, I don't know, flat, whereas the orange is making it lovely and warm because it's got some red base in it. Speaking of red, I might grab a bit of that, and I'm just going to pop a little bit through here. And again, sort of glaze it over the top of my orangey colour and create some depth. And again, as I said, I'm not blending too much, but I can just dab that in gently and create a really nice tone. So you can see the fold of this front petal that comes up at the base here. It's a bit tricky to see, but there is a little light section. So it kind of folds around the base here. And then we've got this beautiful shape as it comes out from the base of the flower. So if you pull your pastel in that direction, kind of pull it around and out. And then we've got this little bright section just on the edge there. And that's going to define it from the other colours behind it. That yellow is not quite bright enough, I don't think. So I can use my lightest, my pale yellow, just to get a bit of a shine on the edge of that petal there. It kind of brings it forward. And you can soften off things if you feel like it's too much. Just pop your fingers in there and dab the colour around. So I know I said don't blend, but if you want to, you know, quieten the colour down a little bit, then by all means, just gently push it in. So there's different techniques for blending as well. You can press hard and go hard and push it all in, or you can just dab it gently. It's quite varied with the movements that you can do to get different effects. I'm liking my yellow less and less as I do this orange. I think the orange is way nicer, much warmer. I'm going to grab this other orange that I have over here. Now this is quite a long stick, so if you have a long stick, you don't want to break it, and I don't, because this is quite nice, this one. You can just sort of use it on its side but tilt it a little bit, so you just get to use the tip of it. Not the hard, sharp tip, but just this side, I guess. Side of one end. That's lovely and warm. Much nicer than the bright yellow. Might have to change my colour scheme now. Okay. So just gently pushing that around, gently. You might find, like I have, that your darks have gone away, so we've kind of pushed them in a bit too much. So I need to get some dark back in. So I picked up my red violet again. I'm just going to put a few little dark sections in again. We've also got to put that centre area in. Because remember, if you want your brights to be bright, you've got to have dark nearby. There's no light without dark, and vice versa. Okay, so I've got quite a bit of dust gathering on my page there because I am working on a flat table. I'm going to tip that off. If you're working on an easel or something on an angle, you'll find that the dust will just drop off. Often it'll catch on your paper as well, so it can get a bit kind of messy when the dust catches on your paper. I'm just putting a bit of red in here. I feel like I want to warm up my dark areas a bit more. I think that it's a little bit too dull. So I'm trying not to blend too much now. As you start to build up your layers, you want to blend less. And when you put the pastel over other pastel, it kind of starts to blend with whatever's on there anyway. So you can actually use the pastel to blend whatever's already there. So it's quite nice. There we go. Let's get stuck into this middle bit. So we've got to put the little black thing in there. I've still got my grid mark, so I can sort of figure out where that needs to sit within the grid. And it's around about there. Just got to tip off my dust again. So the dust can get quite annoying, so you've just got to make sure you get it off your paper. So that's my little dark mark. Now I don't want to blend that in because I want to keep it nice and dark. I'm just going to use my little bright yellow pastel. There's a cross on there. I don't know if you can see that little cross on that. So you don't need to do every little detail. Just put a shape in there that looks like what you can see. And then I'm going to use try this one. I kind of decided I don't like the yellow so much, so I'm going to try and stick to oranges. And just do some little lines like this out from the center. Notice that behind that black thingy, the middle bit, they all kind of stem up. But then there's some in front of it as well. And as you come around towards the front part of the flower, the direction of the stamens change, and they sort of all sprout out from the middle, but there are some that pop up in front of this little black thingy. So just check that you've got those directions right, because that's going to help with the perspective. If you have them all coming out from the middle, fanning out like a star, then it won't look natural. So what we need to do in this section here, shorter marks, some fanning out towards the left or right, and then others kind of going up a little bit because it's closer to us. Does that make sense? So the way that they're kind of folding is different to what's happening around the outside on the left side, because we can see them all shooting up through there like that. And then when we put all the little dots on the top, that will kind of lift it all again. So they're all different colours too, if you've noticed. Some are a little darker and a little lighter, and they're kind of not actual dots, they're little dash shapes. So I'm using a dark orange for some, and I'm just using the very corner of this little pastel. This is a little square one. So I'm just using the corner to get a little sharp tip or mark. So that's going to be my darker tone. You can hardly see it, but that's okay. And I'm just going to go in between these marks here with a bit of dark, just to try and emphasize that a little bit more. So see, when I was saying before, it's good to get that dark in underneath before you put your light over the top. But some of the dark has got a bit muddied and a bit lost in transit. So I'm just putting a few little dark marks in to try and let those little light ones pop a bit more. Like that. Cool. And then I don't want to use my lightest yellow because I think that'll be too bright. I want to save that for my really shiny bits on the petals, for instance, like here. If I use, I'm going to do a few with this one. I'll just change my mind again. Not too many though, because then it will kind of saturate it and you won't have any brights. So if you try to keep your mark fairly random and natural. Something like that. And then while I've got this in my hand, I'm just going to put a bit of bright here and there where I can see it on the petals too. So this is when we're starting to look at the really bright sections and the highlights. And I can put this down and sort of softly push it around a little bit. So what's happening is it's starting to sort of blend with the colours that are already on there. So I can kind of mute it down a little bit. I just went away from all the middle bits then, didn't I? Got distracted. This is what happens. I tend to have a colour in my hand and think, oh, where else can I put that? Because I like to economise. And then if I've gone too bright, I can come back over it with my little orange and whiten it down a bit. So you can see that there's lots of layering happening here. And then I'm going to come back in here and do more little stamen dots with this. So this is my golden yellow that I was using initially. You might find you might have to press a little bit firmer to get those little dots to stick to the paper, depending again on what pastels you have. So if they're a harder pastel, they might not be drawing quite so easily. when you do your finer lines like this, especially when you've got a fair bit down underneath already. So if you've got a fairly good layer of pastels down underneath, the harder pastels tend not to sort of stick or mark quite so easily. Okay. So that's starting to come together quite well now. This is what I kind of intended. So you can see it takes a little while to build up the tones and the layers and the colours to really start to get it to look like it's got some texture and body and all those lovely little folds in in the petals there. So again, I've got this orange. It's very creamy, this one. So I know it's not going to stick for much longer. It feels like a schminky. Schminky pastels are super creamy. They're beautiful, but they fill up the paper really fast and you can't actually get a lot on before it starts to scream and say, no more. And if that does happen, a fixative is always a good option to put down in between your layers. So technically I could use a spray fixative to spray this now, and then I can put more over the top if I want to keep building on top of it. But what will happen is the fixative dulls the colours, so any brights I've got in there will kind of go a bit dull, and that's sort of the risk, I suppose, with it. I like using fixative, but I don't want to put it on my final layers because it dulls my colours too much. So it's good for in between if you want to keep building your layers up. But for the final one before printing, I usually don't put it on. Well, not printing, framing, sorry. So I'm just kind of wandering around with different oranges to try and create a little bit more variation in the tone. But it's coming along. It's got a bit of a way to go. This yellow, this first yellow I started with, I'm really not liking that. It's going kind of green and yucky. Put that away, don't want that one. Speaking of green, I forgot to put green in here. So pick up my green and pop a bit of that in there. I might pop some on the stem while I'm here. So this is quite a light colour. Just literally using the end of the pastel to draw a line. And then I've got my dark green. So this is a tiny little stump. Use that dark green even. It's still got plastic on it. Might have to go and get another one. Don't think that one's going to work. It's too small. One moment. Actually, I've just found this bluey green colour. That might be quite lovely. I'll try that on the stem here. Oh, yeah. Nice. So again, just thinking about the shadows. These stems are mostly in shadows, so they're not going to be super bright and they're not going to have a lot of light on them. So mine are probably a bit too bright. If you do something like that and then you want to blend the colours together but your fingers are too fat, then a blender is a really good thing to have. So there's a few options around. There's these guys, which is a little set of 6 that you can buy for about $14, and they've got a rubber tip on them, so they're quite bendy and they're really good for pushing your colours in like this. So if your fingers are fat and you don't want to make something too fat or blur, then you can use a little blender like this to just rub the colours together. And so these ones come in a set of 6 and they're all got different tips on them. So they're quite handy. And then there's these guys, which is the Art Spectrum blender. It's also got a rubber tip on it. This one's a number 2. They go all the way up to 16, I think. They get really chunky. But I find this size is quite good because it's just big enough to do these fine areas that I want to push into or blend without making it too messy with my fingers. Because sometimes your fingers are too big to get into spaces like that. So blenders are really handy just to get into those finer areas. Okay, I'm going to tip off my dust. So you can see where I've tipped it off, it's all caught on the paper here. So if you're working on an easel, you might find that your dust is dropping and catching on the paper like that because it's almost like a magnet for it. Later on, if you want to clean your paper up, just grab your kneadable eraser again, trusty thing. This is why they get so filthy. And I can dab that rather than blending. I don't want to rub it. I just want to dab it and kind of pick up all that dust. So you can do that on your paper and then just knead it in, give it a bit of a rub around, find a clean side and keep doing that. So that'll get your excess dust off your paper. If you do blend it in, it kind of might rub it in and you might not be able to take it off quite so easily. So it's better to dab than rub, because rubbing will just make it stick to your paper and stain it more. So that's a good way of kind of cleaning up around the edges later on as well. If you need to do that, you can see around this edge here I've kind of messed it up a little bit, so I can go in there with my kneadable eraser and just get some of that off later on. All right, so again, I'm just going to try this blue. I don't know why I picked up this bluey colour, but remember I said to you before, you might get an urge to pick up a different colour to create different shades and tones, and I feel like I need to add something else to get this shadow working properly. And I know blue and yellow are going to make green, so I really don't want to blend it too much, but I quite like how that's working. It's kind of looking a little bit closer to the colour in the picture than what the red violet did. Maybe it's a bit too dirty now. I don't know. Try purple. So this is why it's good to test your colours before you start. So if I had a spare bit of this coloured paper, you know, you could push your colours around on it and just blend them together and see what you can create. It's a little bit like having a palette where you mix colours before you start, and so you can just look at them and see how they work together. I think that's better actually. And then I can come back over with my orange. So as I said, this is a Schminky, I'm pretty sure, orange, and it's very creamy, so it's starting to not want to hold on to the paper. See how it's going a bit speckly? So there's obviously already enough pastel on there, and the harder I press, the more it's going to resist. But you can literally just keep usually just keep playing with your pastels and layering them over each other until you get that beautiful range of tones and shades. Now I've lost all my stamens now, so I'm going to have to go back in there and put some back in. I'll just try this light yellow to get a few of the brights back in. Put a bit of purple in there for fun. So don't be afraid to try different colours. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If you are not doing a serious painting, if you're just, you know, practicing like we are today, and it's just a bit of fun to play with different colours and see what they do. There we go. So I'm going to move over onto the other flower and we'll quickly do that one. See how with the pastels you can just do these little shapes and get these really nice blends of colour happening. I find if I press a bit harder, the pastel might stick a bit more. So again, it's about pressure too. Don't be afraid to press hard. In my class the other night, I had a lady who had some harder pastels and she couldn't get her white to get white. And I said, just press really hard. This paper's tough. It'll take a lot, you know. And so once she realised she could push harder with it, she was happy because it all kind of started to work then. And she could get the white to shine. All right, so the stamens need a bit more work. I've lost my dark centre. I'm just going to darken that up with that bluey green colour that I found. It's quite lovely. See how by darkening that now it's really defined everything again. So as I said before, don't be afraid to put dark back in. And if you don't have something like this, you can try black. I'm not always a fan of black. I think black tends to make things a little bit dull and you know, not terribly interesting, which is why I tend to go for the dark blues and reds and purples and stuff first. And then if I can't quite get it dark enough, I'll resort to black at the end. And there's nothing wrong with black. Black's great for drama. But I try to keep it for last because I don't want to. Once you go black, you can't go darker, really. It's the same as white. If you can't go whiter than white, so I like to save that for the end. And then if I need more light, I can put that on at the end. But I'm liking what this little pale yellow does. I think that's quite light enough to give me some nice highlights in there. So I can literally just, this is a lovely creamy one as well. So I can just kind of drag that around the edges. Remember there's a few little shiny edges in there. They're kind of all wrinkly, but some of them are catching the sun. I'm going to put my cross back on that thingy. And we actually need some more lines in here. So there's a lot of back and forth, a lot of to and fro with pastels. It's layering all the time and redoing things all the time too. You feel like you're doing the same thing again and again, but that's how they work. They work really nicely when they're layered. I feel like I need another yellow of some description. I think this one's a bit too light. Just to do these little tips on the stamen. Anyway, we'll move on to the second flower. I can always come back and tidy that one up after. So a similar process over here. We should be a bit quicker now that we've got colours and things sorted out. So I'm going to just rub this on, get it nice and thick. This is my golden yellow that I like. It's nice. And looking down in behind the stamen there, it's quite bright. Can you see how it's really light yellow down inside there? So the sun's catching that, or the light, and then everything in front of it is slightly darker tone. So I'm going to work fairly quickly now. What I'm doing now is just putting some light on where I can see highlights. And then come back in with my orange or my golden yellow, whatever colour you've got going on. it's interesting because sometimes the quicker you work, the better the result, because we don't put too much thought into it. And if you've already had a little practice run, it's often a lot easier to get the second one done. So I'm kind of blending a lot less on this one. So it's good to have the two actually, just to try different processes and methods. And I can come back and put that shadow in more detail in a minute. I'm going to pop the little centerpiece in here, using again my dark bluey green colour. So use whatever you've decided to use for your dark. I'll pop a bit of that up in here as well. Use that for the shadow over there. Don't be afraid to, use the darks. It creates more drama. That's already looking more dramatic than the other one. So big bold marks. This is how pastels were always used at the beginning of time. So they were never actually blended, and they were used as more of a drawing medium than anything. And you'll find even now, when you enter a pastel into an exhibition or something, it'll usually be put into the drawing category because they class it as drawing and not painting. Probably because you don't use brushes and things. And it was always considered, to be a drawing medium. So that's why it's easy to use it quite loose on the on your paper, and just sort of let it, do its own thing without blending too much. I like to blend. I really enjoy blending the colours to see what happens. But it's nice sometimes not to, and just let all the pastels mix together and do their own thing. So with the little stamens, just make sure you pull them all out from the centre again. I'm using my lightest yellow for this because I've got a fairly darkish background. Now I want to go back and sort the other one out because it doesn't look right. Anyway, carry on with this. And then we've got some little orange tips on all of those. I'm just going to use this little orange pastel to do the tips. You can see there's lots of them. Some sit up in front of the little dark centerpiece there, so make sure you put a few in front of that. That just gives it more volume and perspective. I might have to sharpen up my dark center again. It's funny how you keep doing it and then you'll lose the brightness or the darkness of something. So you've got to come back in all the time and just touch it up again. So I'm liking this flower better because it's a little bit looser. There's lots of different styles you can use with pastel. Just dotting this on to get some of those little dots in place. And then looking at my petals again just to find where the brights are. Try a bit of purple for my shadows. purple, because purple's got a red base, it's really lovely with these oranges and yellows. It's nice over that dark blue that I had. So that's a very loose style of painting. And then again, I've just picked up my pale yellow for my bright bits because I just want to highlight a few of my little edges here and there. Remember, they're broken lines, so on the edge of your petals, make sure that you don't have one continuous line to put, you know, the brights on, because it's got little ripples in it and you want to make sure that they kind of look like they go up and down. So some catch the light and some don't. Red, get red. Red's lovely too, to give it some warmth and shadow. So as you work towards the end, you kind of start to put in a little bit more detail. Zoom in on your picture if you've got it there on a screen, so you can have a look up close and just find out where the edges and all the fine lines are. And then you can kind of define those a little bit more as you go, because you want those front petals to sort of pop out and sit in the foreground. So they've got to have usually more detail and more information than anything at the back, for instance, because the back ones are further away. So big blocks of bright colour is often it's a nice way to work with pastels too. So doing something like this, you just grab your stick and put in big blocks of, over all the other ones, because you've already got your base down, and then you can kind of build up on that. You can get quite sort of abstract with them. A bit of fun. I'm not very good at abstract. I'm a bit of a realist painter, so I tend to keep going until I get all the detail in there. But I really do admire anyone that can, use these big chunks of colour to make something look like a flower when it's just chunks of colour and not much detail. I think that's kind of cool and very clever. Maybe one day I'll get there. So I think the light yellow that I've been using is a little bit too white. So when I say white can often dull your picture, that's what I mean. You can see in the middle here where I've used it, it's a bit kind of flat and boring. So I think a better color would be, you know, maybe something like this, blended in with a bit more orange or something, just to warm it up a little bit. I know it's a light tone and it does need to be light, but anything with white in it, like this light yellow, even though it pops on the edges, you know, around here, for instance, where we want light to be, it can look a bit kind of flat and dull. And so sometimes white is not a good option because it just dulls things down too much. You know, if you have a red and you put white into it, it's going to go like a pale pinky color. Whereas if you have red and you put a yellow into it, to lighten it, I mean, it can really warm it up and make it look beautiful. So white's not always a great option. Just saying, it has its place for sure. But I think it definitely makes it look too milky. That's what I'm trying to find the word for, milky. So you can see it's looking a bit milky in the middle there. And I feel like I need to warm that up and make it a lot more red or something, because it's just looking a bit too insipid, I guess. But that's me. I prefer lovely, bright, warm colours to my whites. All right, so we're going to wind that up in a moment. Just want to put some of these stamens back in. I blended them all in, so you can see how easy it is to sort of get rid of things if you don't want them. So I pushed them all in before because I thought, no, they're too light. I don't like that colour. And I think that's what's going on over here as well. It's just looking too white. So you can literally just get a pastel and do this, push it all in. It maybe even creates more depth and makes it a bit more interesting. So I've just got to find the right colour to put these marks in. I know they're lighter. I'm trying to avoid the whites. Don't really want to use that yellow that I had initially. I feel like that's also a bit too flat. So I'm going to try this one. That's a bit better. It's warmer. So remember too, you don't always have to do exactly what's in the picture. You kind of got to feel through it sometimes and just find what works for you. Maybe I could be an abstract artist after all. So just keeping my marks lovely and loose. That's feeling much better to me. We've all got different preferences and expectations. Yeah, as I press firmer on the edges there to get that highlight going on with this beautiful orange. It's such a nice colour. Yeah, I'm feeling like that's much nicer. It's warmer and more appealing, especially on this dark coloured background. So you can see how I just keep sort of pushing the colour in and around. It's a little bit like using oil paint. You can kind of keep layering it on top and building up the beautiful glazes until it won't let you anymore. And so then we'll just do some little dots on here. I'm going to use orange, even though I know in the picture they're lighter. I think this will work okay. There's a few different tones in there, of course. But I just want to kind of suggest them rather than make them really obvious. So I'm liking my second flower much better than the first one. And this often happens when you paint two of something. You'll always end up with one that you like better than the other. And then you're forever trying to get them to both be as good as each other. It just takes time, doesn't it? trial and error. And then I could darken up again, just darken up a couple of spots on that little black bit in the middle there, just to give it a bit more depth. Because as I said before, if you want to brighten something, put dark next to it. Put a few little dots on the front there. All right, so we're going to wrap up in a moment and finish up these guys. So I hope that was helpful and useful, and we all learned something. As you probably worked out by now, my classes are more of a problem-solving process than anything else sometimes. And, you know, we just kind of work through it together. And all I'm doing really is saying my thoughts out loud as I work. And if we can all learn from that, then that's awesome. So I'd have to do the same kind of treatment on this one now to get them to look like they belong together. I think this has got a bit too much blue or something in there, so I need to add a bit more red to brighten it up and get rid of most of that pale lemon colour. It's not working for me, because everyone's going to have a different outcome because we've all got different colours in our palettes. And yeah, I love seeing everyone's work at the end because they're all always so different, because everyone sees things differently. We have different pastels, papers and colours, and it's kind of fun just to all do the same thing, but they end up different. So I've just added a fair bit of red and warmth to that to try and get it not to look so dull. I don't like dull stuff. I really prefer to have my brights and beautiful, you know, vibrant colour. Still trying to find a nice light for this. And then I can do these little stamens through there, some dots and things, and then darken off this again. That'll bring the highlight out. Nice. And of course on those on the stems too, remember they've got a bit of fur or little fluffy bits around the edges. So what you could do to create that is find a pencil, preferably probably a pale green rather than a white. White's all I've got here, so I'll just use that to show you. Just do these little furry bits on there. So I'm using, again, holding the pencil very lightly and just let it kind of rest on the paper rather than pushing it in hard, and then just doing these little soft marks. And make sure that you just don't do them on the edges because they are all over the stem, so you want to make it look like it's in the front as well. So kind of just little short ones coming out like that. And as I'm doing that, it's kind of picking up the green of the pastel that's already on the paper. So it's almost like a little blender, the pencil. It's a white pencil, but it seems to be going kind of a light green. So you can do that kind of thing or not. If you just want to leave it undone, that's cool too. It's your flower. It's your flower. Just want to lighten this up a bit more. Put some more little stamens in there. And there we go. I think that might do for today. I do want to keep fiddling with it. All right. Did I try purple? I think I did. purple's nice. See how that gives you that gorgeous kind of shadow colour? And then pushing it around with whatever's on the paper already, the yellows and the oranges, just gives it that lovely depth. I think the thing is though, I need to, because that's now darker, which it actually is in the picture, I need to kind of lighten up on here a bit more. Just need to find the right colour for those guys. And I keep picking up this pale lemon, but I think that's a bit too light, maybe. Maybe not. So yeah, it's all experimenting, isn't it? It's just trying different things. So I feel like I want to add a little bit more light to this. So I'm just going to go and have a look and see what else I've got in my collection. I picked up a little apricot colour one. I'm not sure whether that's going to do the job or not, but it's a little lighter than what I've already used, but it's not too white. So I just feel like I want to add a little bit more light with that. That might be a bit better. So again, it'll depend on how many colours you have and all those things. I feel like that's slightly better. I'm just going to pop that over on the other one as well. Just a few little lines. You can see they all stem out from the middle, and then there's a couple sitting up in front of those dark middle areas there. So I think this one's a little bit too creamy, so it's not quite hanging on as nicely as I'd like it to. And then I'm just going to grab my the very lightest one that I had initially, just to put some highlights in there. There we go. I think that might just about do it for this one. So I hope you've enjoyed this class, and thank you very much for coming. And please do send me photos of your art when you're finished, because I'd love to see how you went. I can't help myself, I've got to keep fiddling now, finding all the little light bits. Maybe this one isn't so bad after all. So I like to save the light for last usually, and just put in a few little highlights right at the end, and that's when you get the joy, because sometimes it's a bit of a painful process, and so to pop in highlights at the end and get the light to bounce for you is such a nice feeling. There we go. A little bit of light up in there. So I just did go back to that light lemony colour, because I just couldn't find anything else that was going to quite work for me. I'm popping that in just around some of the edges where I can see a little bit of the light bouncing off the petal. And not blending it in either, so leaving it sitting on the top of the pastel so that the colour just sort of pops instead of pushing it around. If I push it around, it's just going to get kind of muddy again. There we go. And then when you've finished your painting, you might want to keep going, but when you have finished, make sure you pop your name on it somewhere. So use either a pastel pencil or a charcoal pencil, and just pop your name in like that. And again, you can use your kneadable eraser just to take out your grid lines if you want to keep your background quite plain and clean. Otherwise, if you've made a big mess of it and you love your painting, then you can always fill in the background with more pastel. So if I was going to do that, I'd put what is in the picture, which is like a greeny blue kind of colour, and then some little, green light bits at the bottom to indicate that, there's flowers and leaves and stuff around in the background. So thanks for coming, and I hope you've enjoyed today's class.